The year we'll remember as 2020, the year that brought so much pain and death and loss, didn't start on January 1st. That year didn't really begin for New Yorkers until March 1st. That's when we learned of New York's first COVID case, when everything started to unravel into a year when the more we knew, the less certain we were. On March 2nd, Governor Andrew Cuomo began what would become near daily updates on the virus.
First, we're going to speak about the situation that was reported last night with a person who tested positive for the coronavirus. That woman is a healthcare worker. She's 39 years old. She had been working in Iran and came back on Tuesday to New York.
No one could possibly fathom then how completely our lives would change, first within a dozen dizzying days, then over a dozen months. The virus would soon find its way into every corner of the state, flooding hospitals and shutting schools, decimating local economies. The coronavirus was an unseen unknown, but its impact was unmistakable. It would kill more than 40,000 New Yorkers and counting. About 10% of a staggering national death toll that continues to rise even with a vaccine in distribution. It was a year apart, a year without in-person religious services, without 4th of July fireworks and vacation trips, no Labor Day picnics or trick-or-treating. Holidays were household-only affairs, empty seats at the Thanksgiving table, fewer stockings hung at Christmas. A year without hugs for Grandma, when what we craved was a good, long embrace. It was a year when everyone wanted the same thing at the same time: hand sanitizer, toilet paper, an unemployment check, COVID tests, and, as 2021 arrived, COVID vaccines. The day after confirming that first case, Cuomo was back with a second, a New Rochelle lawyer, and we got a crash course in how viruses spread.
This is the most complex case that we have had in terms of number of interactions. There was the attorney, as you know, who worked in a law firm in Manhattan, family in Westchester. They had attended schools, both Yeshiva University and the SAR school. They had been to synagogue services that had a large number of people. So it was the most complex detective investigation matter.
All of a sudden, all eyes were on New Rochelle. Cuomo, a week later.
New Rochelle is a particular problem. It is what they call a cluster. The numbers have been going up. The numbers continue to go up. The numbers are going up unabated. And we do need a special public health strategy for New Rochelle.
Hoping to check the virus, the governor set a containment area, shutting schools, businesses, and houses of worship within a mile radius of the synagogue.
What we are going to do is focus on an area, concentric circle, around the situs of the majority of the cases in New Rochelle.
The National Guard was deployed.
We're covering food distribution missions to be here in New Rochelle and Tuckahoe as well.
Having uniformed troops in a quiet New York community was proof that this was something different. We soon learned how different. The World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. Cuomo limited public gatherings to 500, shut theaters and arenas. Broadway had weathered world wars and 9/11, but would succumb to an unseen enemy. It has been a ghost town since March 12th, with few predicting a return before fall 2021. The virus soon had a toehold in western New York. A Rochester man was the first case there. The rest of New York and the nation watched as things got grim in a hurry. Within 3 weeks of that first New York City case, Cuomo put the entire state on pause, closing all non-essential businesses and ordering people to stay home. Experts would later say a faster lockdown might have saved thousands of lives. When COVID struck, New Yorkers were busy filling in dates in 2020 calendars, planning graduations, proms, and weddings. High school basketball playoffs were about to start. High school musicals about to open. Those plans, those milestones were postponed, canceled, altered. The rest of the country is now learning what New York was first to learn. In one Yonkers hospital last March, 11 patients died in a single shift. We learned about personal protective equipment, PPE, masks and face shields and gloves, because they were often in short supply in our hospitals. So too were ventilators. Families of the hospitalized learned another cruel coronavirus reality.
We've had patients die here, pass away in our ED, and the families show up thinking that they could say goodbye to their loved ones. And that was the first Sunday I was here, and the first family I ran into, and it was 3 generations waiting to come in to see their loved ones to say goodbye. And it was very tough because I had to say to them they can't come in.
Nurses did what they could, holding up phones so a son could say what would be a final goodbye to his mother.
That's a tough one. You just don't walk away unchanged when something like that happens.
Hospitals ran out of room for the dead. Refrigerated trucks became makeshift morgues. Funeral parlors were overwhelmed, with New York City families desperate to find someone to bury their dead. A potter's field on Hart Island in the Bronx saw wave after wave of simple pine caskets arrive. A Yonkers funeral home director made regular 4-hour round trips to Camden, New Jersey, the nearest crematory that was accepting cases.
This experience has been so draining and overwhelming. Like, I can't even think about what I'm doing anymore, because I think if I did, I'd probably break down at this point.
When a second wave of cases began to rise last fall, healthcare workers relived the trauma. In the first month, the virus killed 3,411 New Yorkers. A month later, the toll had eclipsed 20,000. 11 months into the pandemic, after a long-feared post-holiday second wave, the toll was 44,148 and climbing. Always climbing. By that time, a staggering 456,000 Americans had died of the virus. Each of those was a mother, a father, a son or daughter, a colleague or friend. Each had a story to tell and a family left behind. The first month of the virus in New York was head-spinning and terrifying, and the rest of New York was watching. Crystal Kanicki, an ICU nurse in Buffalo, heard about her fellow nurses dying of COVID in hospitals downstate. Based on that information, she did what she thought was necessary.
I thought it would be unfair for my husband with 2 young kids, if I did pass away, to have to plan a funeral on top of dealing with everything else. So I did plan my funeral ahead of time. I wrote my own obituary.
A 33-year-old nurse planning her own funeral. That was 2020. Before Broome County in the southern tier had a single COVID case, County Executive Jason Garner declared a state of emergency and ordered schools closed through April 13th. The region, he said, needed to be proactive. Within days, schools statewide would be shut, first for spring break, then switched to remote learning, which brought untold challenges to teachers, students, and parents. In Greene County in the Catskills, Patrick Linger, chair of the county legislature, pointed out that his county has no hospital, and he had a message for downstaters. Keep COVID where it is. Travel into Greene County from any area at this time, Linger said in March, is inadvisable and is highly discouraged. Still, there were moments of light. Grateful New Yorkers banged pots and pans every evening to thank doctors and nurses. When the shifts changed at the hospital in Nyack, musicians serenaded from across the street. When patients beat COVID and were released, a loudspeaker played "Here Comes the Sun" or the theme from Rocky.
Patient number 400.
Just beautiful. The staff is unbelievable here.
But despite lockdowns and protocols and cancellations, the virus made its way upstate, with the death toll mounting. Cuomo's daily briefings became must-watch events, carried on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. A bully pulpit orchestrated down to the last reveal on the last PowerPoint slide to burnish his reputation. In the absence of strong federal action, Cuomo found his voice and his platform. It's where he announced executive orders and limits on gatherings and charted the grim uptick of cases. It's where he talked about flattening the curve, introduced New York on pause and New York tough, and the phased return of businesses from lockdown when cases fell last summer. It's also where Cuomo downplayed a fateful decision, a March 25th directive ordering nursing homes to accept patients no matter their COVID status. That order cost lives, experts have concluded, as the virus devastated our most vulnerable population, those least equipped to fight it off. Technology gave and took away during the pandemic.
Create some things that'll help, doctors and nurses that are in need.
And you have a shield.
Those who were on the right side of the digital divide could lean on technology to get through, working from home, streaming movies, ordering supplies on Amazon, getting takeout delivered by Uber Eats or DoorDash, which kept some local restaurants afloat.
Our kids weren't very tech savvy before this, and they didn't play with computers a lot, so that's also been a little bit of a learning curve.
But those who relied on libraries for computers had nowhere to go when the libraries shut down. New York's antique unemployment system couldn't answer the call literally. The phone lines jammed with frantic people. The website timed them out, kicked them off. When the system failed, whether with unemployment or COVID tests or later the vaccine rollout, frustration was high.
I've been out here since 9 o'clock this morning. I have a 10:30 appointment, and I just feel that it's not fair that they're not honoring the appointment times today, that you can come at any time.
How can it be easier, we wondered, to stream Bridgerton on Netflix than it is to file for unemployment or to find a life-saving vaccine?
Say his name! Say his name! No justice! No justice!
In June, after 2 months of lockdowns and anxiety and isolation, all that stoked-up energy erupted in protests seeking racial justice. From Albany to White Plains, from Binghamton to Manhattan, cries of Black Lives Matter echoed alongside the final words of George Floyd, who died under the knee of a Minneapolis police officer. In September, after video footage showed Rochester police involved in the asphyxiation death of 41-year-old Daniel Prude, a case eerily similar to Floyd's, there were more protests and calls for justice.
This is for Daniel!
But the overarching story, the one that left no one untouched, was the pandemic. It cost thousands of New Yorkers their jobs. Big chains filed for bankruptcy. Restaurants we loved won't be there when this is over. Malls, remember malls, will have empty storefronts when people are ready to return. The pandemic took the rush out of rush hour. Main streets fell silent. Commutes all but ended. In Manhattan, Grand Central Terminal lost its bustle. Buses and subways were for first responders or essential workers. We learned who was essential. Hospital workers, police, fire, EMTs, but also grocery workers and those who feed us. The hospitality and entertainment industries cratered. Stages fell silent far from Broadway. Rochester's Giva Theater, Bardavon in Poughkeepsie, the Capitol in Portchester. All await word on when they might open. That word has yet to come. Summer festivals, from Bethel Woods to Hudson Valley Shakespeare to the Glimmerglass Festival in Cooperstown, were canceled. Speaking of Cooperstown, even Derek Jeter had to wait. His 2020 Hall of Fame induction pushed back to 2021. Meanwhile, the 2020 Yankees played without fans in the stands. The auto race at Watkins Glen was shifted to Daytona. Golf's U.S. Open at Westchester's famed Winged Foot was postponed from June till September then played without fans lining fairways. The Buffalo Bills had no fans in the stands till they made the playoffs, and about 7,000 diehards were admitted to Rich Stadium after being COVID tested. High school athletes faced disappointment, with spring sports canceled for the class of 2020. Things looked bleak for the class of 21, with Cuomo permitting only low-risk sports in the fall and holding off on high-risk basketball, hockey, and football until the calendar turned. Those seasons will go on, virus permitting. The class of 2020's graduations were postponed, then reimagined. Pomp and Circumstance was played on Zoom or Facebook Live, in mall parking lots converted to drive-ins, or at actual drive-ins. The pandemic taught us to use our cars for more than getting from point A to point B. We got COVID tested in our cars, had curbside groceries and takeout placed in our cars, watched graduation parades pass by in cars. The fortunate even got vaccines in their cars. Julia Wright Rogers has been home with her 7-year-old twins as they navigate second grade, 3 days home, 2 days in school. The Westchester mom is grateful. Her family hasn't lost anyone to the virus. She and her husband haven't lost work. Supervising their education has given her a window into the way her twins think. In a decade, when they talk about that pandemic time, she knows what she'll tell them.
We are lucky, and that's what I'll say in 10 years. You know what? It makes you a stronger person because, adversity, overcoming adversity, and, it made us a tighter family unit. There were some good things, but, we were really lucky.